May 8, 1945. Northern England, Yorkshire Moors. The war in Europe has ended exactly 6 hours ago, yet the gates of Camp 174 still stand locked, guarded by British soldiers who no longer point their rifles inward with the same conviction they held yesterday. Inside the wire, 17,000 young men, some barely 19, others not yet 23, sit in wooden barracks, awaiting their first meal as prisoners of a nation they were trained to despise. They expect starvation rations, perhaps violence. Certainly the humiliation their propaganda ministers promised would await any German soldier who surrendered to the decadent Anglo-Saxon Empire. What they do not expect, what none of them can possibly imagine, is the middle-aged British officer who will enter their compound within the hour, carrying not a weapon, but a clipboard, accompanied not by guards but by 3 university professors, announcing that classes in mathematics, literature, and engineering will begin Monday morning, and attendance, while technically voluntary, is strongly encouraged for those who wish to rebuild their broken country with competence rather than merely regret. The prisoners arrive in waves throughout late April and early May. Teenagers pulled from the collapsing Wehrmacht, boys who joined the Hitler Youth at 12 and found themselves in Wehrmacht uniforms by 17, told they were defending European civilization against Bolshevik hordes and British imperialism. They board trucks in Belgium and France, in Holland and Denmark, expecting transport to labor camps, to mines, to the punishment their Reich ministers warned would be the fate of any German who fell into enemy hands. The Ministry of Propaganda had been explicit. The British would work them to death in factories, would starve them as revenge for the Blitz, would cage them like animals in muddy fields without shelter or dignity. The trucks roll through the English countryside on roads the Luftwaffe never managed to crater, past farms the Wehrmacht never reached, through villages intact and orderly in ways that contradict everything these young men were taught about a Britain supposedly on its knees, supposedly desperate, supposedly weeks from collapse since 1940. They see children playing football in schoolyards. They see women shopping without fear. They see queues outside cinemas, not bread lines. One 18-year-old from Hamburg, drafted 8 months ago after his gymnasium was closed, will later write in his diary, "I thought England was destroyed. They told us London was rubble, but these villages looked more whole than anything I'd seen in Germany for 2 years." Camp 174 sprawls across former farmland requisitioned by the War Office. Rows of Nissen huts, administrative buildings made from corrugated steel and timber, a parade ground that doubles as a football pitch, latrines that actually function, a mess hall large enough to seat 300 at once. Barbed wire surrounds the perimeter, guard towers at each corner, but the wire is not electrified, and the guards in the towers are reading newspapers, smoking cigarettes, displaying the bored indifference of men who know the war is ending, and their duties have become bureaucratic rather than martial. The camp commandant is Colonel James Vickers, 53 years old, a veteran of the previous war who spent 1917 in a German POW camp himself, and remembers the hunger, the cold, the casual cruelty of guards who saw prisoners as subhuman. He has decided his camp will be different, not out of sentimentality, but out of conviction that Germany's future depends on what its young men learn while in captivity. The first meal arrives at 6 in the evening. Boiled potatoes, tinned meat, bread with margarine, tea with actual sugar. The rations are not generous by pre-war British standards. The entire United Kingdom remains under strict rationing, with civilians limited to 1 egg per week, meat twice weekly, butter measured in ounces. But to boys who spent the last 6 months eating sawdust bread and nettle soup on the retreating Eastern Front, this is abundance beyond comprehension. A 20-year-old former Panzer Grenadier from Stuttgart stares at his plate and begins to weep, not from gratitude but from the cognitive dissonance of receiving better food as a prisoner than he did as a soldier defending the Reich. His tentmate, a farm boy from Bavaria who joined the Waffen-SS at 17 because it was that or the coal mines, eats slowly, methodically, as though afraid the meal is a hallucination that will vanish if he acknowledges it too directly. The myths begin to crumble that first night, but the prisoners resist the crumbling, clinging to the certainties they were taught. A small group gathers in one of the barracks after lights out, and the eldest among them, a 23-year-old Unteroffizier who still wears his Iron Cross beneath his prisoner uniform, argues that the food is a trick, psychological warfare, that tomorrow they will be worked like slaves, that the British are simply fattening them before the slaughter. Others nod in agreement, desperate to maintain the worldview that has sustained them through years of indoctrination. If the British are not monsters, then what were they fighting for? If the enemy is capable of decency, then what does that make their own side? But doubts creep in during the night. One boy, barely 18, whispers a question that others are thinking but dare not voice. Why would they feed us like this if they hate us? No one answers because the answer requires admitting that everything they were taught might have been a lie, and that admission is too large, too devastating to confront on their first night behind barbed wire in a country they were trained to see as degenerate and dying. Sleep comes slowly, interrupted by the unfamiliar sensation of a full stomach, the unsettling quiet of a land where no artillery rumbles in the distance, the strange terror of safety after years of fear. Monday morning, May 14th. The prisoners are assembled in the mess hall at 9 o'clock expecting work assignments, road crews, ditch digging, farm labor, the usual fate of captured soldiers. Instead, Colonel Vickers stands before them with 3 civilians. Professor Margaret Thornley from Oxford, a mathematician who volunteered to teach in POW camps, Dr. Robert Chen, a literature instructor from Cambridge whose parents fled China in 1925, and Arthur Morrison, a retired engineer who helped design Spitfire engines and now wishes to prevent the next generation from building the next war machine through ignorance. Vickers speaks in German, serviceable, heavily accented, learned during his own captivity 28 years prior. Gentlemen, you are not here to break rocks. You are here to repair your minds, which have been filled with rubbish by your former government. We will offer classes in mathematics, science, literature, history. Real history, not the mythology you were taught. Attendance is voluntary, but those who refuse will still work. Farm labor, camp maintenance, nothing punitive, but manual work nonetheless. Those who attend classes will spend their afternoons studying, their evenings reading, and their weekends playing football. You may think this is soft, that we are weak. You are welcome to think that. You are also welcome to remain ignorant for the rest of your lives. The choice is yours. The silence in the hall is absolute. The prisoners exchange glances. Confusion, suspicion, disbelief. The underofficer with the iron cross stands abruptly. You expect us to betray our education? To forget everything we learned in German schools? Vickers regards him calmly. I expect you to learn mathematics that works, physics that doesn't require racial theory to explain the universe, and history that includes perspectives beyond your Führer's delusions. If you consider that betrayal, then yes, I expect betrayal. That afternoon, 47 prisoners sign up for classes. By week's end, the number has grown to 312. Not because they have abandoned their ideology, most still cling to fragments of it, but because boredom in a POW camp is a kind of death, and learning offers dignity that ditch digging does not. They tell themselves they are only attending to pass the time, to avoid manual labor, to gain skills they can use when they return to rebuild Germany. They do not yet realize that learning changes the learner, that knowledge is a solvent that dissolves certainty. The psychological fractures appear gradually, not dramatically. Professor Thornley begins her mathematics courses with basic algebra, but within 3 weeks she is teaching calculus to boys who were told that advanced mathematics was a Jewish corruption of pure German Aryan geometry. One student, a former Hitler youth leader who memorized chapters of Mein Kampf and recited them at regional competitions, solves a differential equation and experiences a moment of pure intellectual joy, entirely disconnected from ideology, and in that moment realizes that mathematics has no nationality, that truth is not German or British but simply true. The realization terrifies him. He stops attending classes for 4 days, then returns, silent and shaken, and works through problem sets with an intensity that suggests he is trying to prove something to himself. Dr. Chen's literature seminars become forums for dangerous questions. He assigns them Shakespeare, Hamlet, Macbeth, plays about power and corruption, and the lies men tell themselves to justify violence. The prisoners read in English, haltingly at first, then with growing fluency. A boy from Cologne, whose father was a schoolteacher before the party forced him into correct pedagogical methods, reads Macbeth's soliloquy. I am in blood stepped in so far that, should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er, and understands for the first time that the play is not about medieval Scotland, but about the Reich, about his own nation's descent into atrocity, about the point where abandoning evil becomes harder than continuing it. He closes the book and stares at the wall for 20 minutes while his classmates continue discussing the text. Arthur Morrison teaches practical engineering, bridge construction, electrical systems, metallurgy, but he also teaches the engineering of war, showing them blueprints of British tanks, Spitfire fighters, naval destroyers, not to glorify British power, but to demonstrate the industrial capacity that made German victory impossible from the start. He spreads production charts across the table: British aircraft manufacturing in 1943, American Sherman tank output, Soviet artillery production. The numbers are staggering, incomprehensible. One student, a former Luftwaffe mechanic, studies the figures for a long time, then asks quietly, "Did our leaders know these numbers?" Morrison nods. Yes. The mechanic's voice drops to a whisper. Then why did they keep fighting? Morrison has no answer that would comfort anyone. By June, a parallel transformation is occurring beyond the classroom. The camp establishes a library, donated books from British civilian volunteers, newspapers, censored for operational security but otherwise current, magazines discussing reconstruction, European recovery, the trials being planned in Nuremberg. The prisoners read about the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, about camps in Poland and Germany, about the systematic murder of millions. The initial reaction is denial, furious and absolute. These are lies, British propaganda, atrocity fabrications like those spread about Germany during the First World War. The Unteroffizier with the Iron Cross organizes a petition demanding the removal of false materials designed to humiliate the German people. Colonel Vickers responds by bringing survivors to speak: a British Jewish soldier whose entire family in Poland was murdered, a Dutch resistance fighter who hid Jewish families and watched neighbors deported, a German émigré who fled in 1936 and lost contact with everyone he knew. The testimonies are quiet, factual, free of melodrama. No one shouts, no one accuses. They simply describe what they witnessed, what they survived, what they lost. The prisoners listen in silence, some because they are beginning to believe, others because they have been ordered to attend, a few because they already knew, had heard rumors, had seen things on the Eastern Front that they tried to forget. That night, fights break out in 3 barracks, not over the testimonies directly, but over the implications. Boys who want to believe split into factions, those who insist it is all lies, those who admit it might be partly true but blame the SS rather than the Wehrmacht, those who are beginning to understand that complicity is not limited to those who pulled triggers and those who simply go silent, unable to process the magnitude of what their nation did. The British Guards intervene but do not punish harshly. Vickers understands that psychological collapse sometimes manifests as violence, that these boys are experiencing the death of their entire worldview, and that such deaths are painful. The following week, attendance in classes increases again. Some prisoners are fleeing into mathematics and literature to avoid confronting history. Others are seeking tools to understand how their nation went mad. Morrison notices that his engineering students ask different questions now, not just how to build, but why to build, what purpose technology should serve, whether progress measured only in industrial output is actually progress at all. He has no simple answers, but he appreciates that they are finally asking the right questions. July brings summer heat and a crisis of conscience for the camp's most devoted believers. The Unteroffizier with the Iron Cross, whose name is Klaus Reinhardt, organizes a secret gathering in the latrines after midnight, the only place guards rarely patrol. 15 hardcore loyalists attend, boys who still believe the Reich was righteous, that Germany was defending Europe against communism and Jewish conspiracy, that their defeat was a tragedy rather than a deliverance. Reinhardt speaks with desperate conviction. They are breaking us. These classes, these books, these testimonies, it is all designed to destroy our pride, to make us ashamed of Germany. We must resist. We must remember who we are. But the resistance is crumbling, even among the faithful. One of the 15, a former Hitler youth from Dresden, raises his hand hesitantly. "Klaus, I have been reading the production numbers Morrison showed us. The Americans produced 30,000 tanks in 1943 alone. We produced 5,000. If our leaders knew this, if they understood we could not win, why did they keep sending us to fight?" Reinhardt's answer is immediate. Because some things are worth dying for. Honor, homeland, the survival of the Aryan race. But his voice lacks its former certainty, and the others notice. Another boy, younger, barely 19. "I spoke with that Dutch man, the one who hid Jewish families. He said he knew Germans who also hid people. Who helped? Who refused orders? If there were Germans who resisted, were they traitors or heroes? The question hangs in the humid air of the latrine, unanswerable within their old framework. Reinhardt tries. They were confused, misguided, influenced by enemy propaganda. But the words sound hollow even to him, because he has been reading too. Not just the books assigned in class, but the newspapers, the accounts of what happened in the camps, the testimonies of Wehrmacht soldiers who witnessed and participated in massacres on the Eastern Front. And he can no longer maintain the fiction that the SS alone was responsible, that the Wehrmacht fought with honor, that Germany's cause was just. The meeting ends without resolution. The loyalists disperse, but their certainty is fractured. Over the following weeks, attendance at Reinhardt's gatherings declines. Boys stop coming not because they are convinced the British are right, but because they can no longer sustain the cognitive dissonance required to believe Germany was blameless. Some embrace new understanding eagerly. Others retreat into bitter silence. A few experience complete psychological breakdowns and are transferred to medical facilities where British psychiatrists attempt, with mixed success, to help them rebuild shattered identities. August 1945. The atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. The war is completely over. In Camp 174, the prisoners receive the news with mixed reactions. Relief that no more will die, horror at the weapon's power, and for some, a grim satisfaction that others now understand what it means to have cities destroyed from the air. But the prevailing emotion is something closer to numbness. These boys have been processing revelations about their own nation for 3 months, and the destruction of 2 Japanese cities feels almost abstract. Another tragedy in a war defined by tragedy. Professor Thornley introduces a new topic: atomic physics. She explains nuclear fission in mathematical terms, showing them the equations that govern chain reactions, the physics that makes such weapons possible. The prisoners, many of whom are studying advanced mathematics now, follow the derivations with fascination and dread. One student, a 21-year-old who once built radios for Wehrmacht signals units, asks the question everyone is thinking: could Germany have built this bomb? Thornley nods slowly. You had the scientists. You drove most of them away. Werner Heisenberg stayed, and he tried. But your leaders did not provide the resources, did not prioritize the research, because they believed the war would be won quickly through conventional means. Also, your racial theories declared nuclear physics to be Jewish science, which rather hindered progress. The bitter irony is not lost on them. The ideology that promised German supremacy actively sabotaged German capabilities. The regime that claimed to be building a 1,000-year Reich could not even properly organize a weapons research program because it subordinated science to mythology. A boy from Munich, whose father was a physicist before the party, forced him to teach Aryan physics instead of Einstein's relativity. Laughs. A harsh, broken sound. We lost because we were stupid. Not weak, not betrayed. Just stupid. Arthur Morrison takes them deeper into the engineering of modern war. Radar, computing machines, logistics networks, the industrial systems that mobilized entire continents. He shows them how Britain coordinated with America, how resources flowed across the Atlantic, how production was organized not by ideology but by efficiency, how engineers from different nations collaborated rather than competed. The message is subtle but unmistakable. The democratic nations won not merely through material superiority, but through their ability to cooperate, to integrate knowledge regardless of its source, to trust expertise over dogma. The lesson strikes at the heart of everything the prisoners were taught about racial superiority and authoritarian strength. September brings the first repatriation announcements. Prisoners will begin returning to Germany in phases, starting with those deemed denazified, boys who demonstrated genuine engagement with the educational program, who showed signs of understanding what their nation had done, who could be trusted to rebuild rather than resurrect fascism. The announcement creates panic among those still clinging to old beliefs. If cooperating with British education is the path to freedom, are they being coerced into betraying their convictions? But for most, the question is more practical than ideological. What Germany are they returning to? Letters from home arrive irregularly, censored but revealing. A boy from Hamburg learns his city is rubble, his family living in a basement, food obtained through black markets, Allied military government in control. A prisoner from Berlin discovers his father is dead, killed not in combat but by Soviet soldiers during the occupation. his mother and sister missing, possibly fled west, possibly dead. The letters describe a Germany that no longer exists as a sovereign nation, divided into occupation zones, its future uncertain, its population traumatized and starving. The prisoners read these letters and realize they are being prepared to return not to the Reich they fought for, but to something entirely different. A broken landscape where the only currency that matters is the ability to rebuild. Dr. Chen's literature seminars increasingly focus on reconstruction, resilience, the literature of survival. He assigns them Sophocles, Antigone, Oedipus, tragedies about characters who must confront terrible truths and decide who they will become in the aftermath. One student writes an essay comparing Oedipus's discovery of his crimes to Germany's confrontation with its own atrocities. Oedipus blinds himself because he cannot bear to see what he has done. Germany cannot blind itself. We must see, must acknowledge, or we will be blind in a different way, morally, historically, forever. Klaus Reinhardt, the former Unteroffizier who organized resistance to the educational program, submits a formal letter to Colonel Vickers. It is brief, written in careful English he learned over the past months. I request placement in the first repatriation group, not because I have been denazified, I do not know if I have, but because I understand now that Germany needs people who can build bridges, not excuses. I was trained to be a soldier. I wish to become an engineer. I do not ask forgiveness. I ask only the opportunity to be useful. Vickers approves the request and adds Reinhardt's name to the list. October 1945. The first repatriation convoys depart. 300 prisoners board trucks and trains, carrying with them certificates of completion from British educational programs, letters of reference from their instructors, and books, donated by the professors, by British civilians who contributed to the camp library, by soldiers who bought volumes with their own money because they believed these German boys deserved a second chance. The departing prisoners are not the same boys who arrived in April. They are quieter, less certain, burdened by knowledge they did not seek but cannot ignore. Those remaining in camp, still 16,000 strong, with repatriation expected to take years, intensify their studies. New courses are added: political theory, economics, ethics, European history taught without nationalist bias. Professor Thornley introduces a seminar on democratic governance, explaining parliamentary systems, constitutional checks on power, the principle that governments derive legitimacy from the consent of the governed, rather than from the will of a leader. The prisoners listen with the intensity of men who understand they are learning not merely academic subjects, but the blueprints for their nation's future. The camp library expands. British citizens reading about the educational program in newspapers donate thousands of books. A retired schoolteacher from Manchester sends an entire collection of science texts. A widow from Liverpool contributes her late husband's engineering manuals. A Jewish refugee family living in London, who lost relatives in Auschwitz, sends books on Jewish history and philosophy, with a note, so they know who we actually were, not who they were told we were. The gesture moves even hardened cynics among the prisoners because it demonstrates a generosity that their propaganda never predicted, a willingness to educate rather than merely punish. Arthur Morrison organizes a practical project, designing a theoretical reconstruction plan for a bombed German city. The prisoners working in teams must calculate materials needed, labor requirements, timelines, costs. They must design housing, water systems, electrical grids, transportation networks. The project forces them to confront the scale of destruction their own leadership brought upon Germany, not through enemy malice, but through decisions to continue a war that could not be won, to sacrifice cities rather than surrender, to prioritize ideology over survival. One team, designing a water purification system for their hypothetical city, realizes their plan would serve 20,000 people, roughly the population of a small town. One team member observes quietly, "We destroyed so much. It will take a generation to rebuild, maybe more." November brings cold rain and the Nuremberg trials. Newspapers report the proceedings: Göring, Ribbentrop, Speer, others in the dock, facing charges of crimes against humanity, war crimes, aggressive war. The prisoners follow the trials obsessively, not with the detachment of observers, but with the engagement of those who understand they are witnessing the judgment of their own history. Some still defend the accused, insisting they were merely serving Germany, that all nations commit atrocities in war. that the Allies are hypocrites who firebombed Dresden and dropped atomic bombs. But others recognize the distinction. Germany did not merely fight a war. It systematically murdered millions of civilians as a matter of policy, industrialized genocide, made cruelty into bureaucracy. Dr. Chen assigns them transcripts from the trials. They read testimony from concentration camp survivors, from Wehrmacht officers who carried out massacre orders, from bureaucrats who organized deportations, from doctors who performed medical experiments. The documents are translated into German, precise and horrifying. A prisoner from Essen reads a testimony from a Sonderkommando who was forced to remove bodies from gas chambers at Auschwitz, and he vomits, not from weakness, but from the realization that this testimony is true, that his nation did these things, that the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Klaus Reinhardt, preparing for repatriation in December, spends his final weeks in camp writing a letter to his younger brother, still in Germany, aged 15. The letter is long, careful, honest. I do not know what you have been told about the war, about why we fought, about what we were defending. I believed I was protecting Germany. I believed we were the victims of international conspiracy. I believed many things. I was wrong. Not wrong about loving Germany. I still love our country, our language, our culture, but wrong about what loving Germany required. It did not require hating others. It did not require blind obedience. It did not require believing lies simply because they made us feel superior. When you are old enough, you will hear terrible things about what our nation did during this war. You will want to deny them, to insist they are enemy propaganda. Do not. Face them, acknowledge them, and then decide what kind of German you will be. One who makes excuses, or one who builds something better. The letter is never sent. Klaus keeps it, folded in his pocket, planning to give it to his brother in person. But the act of writing it marks his final transformation from soldier to citizen, from believer to questioner, from someone who accepted certainty to someone who embraces doubt. December 1945. Snow falls on Camp 174, softening the wire and watchtowers, transforming the compound into something almost peaceful. The prisoners have been here 8 months now, long enough for the camp to feel like a strange kind of home, a place where they are safe from the chaos of Germany, where they are fed and educated and treated not as monsters, but as young men who made terrible mistakes because they were taught terrible things. Some prisoners will remember this camp with gratitude, others with shame at their gratitude, a few with bitterness that captivity had to teach them what freedom should have. Professor Thornley administers final exams in mathematics. The results are extraordinary. Boys who arrived barely literate in algebra are now solving differential equations, understanding calculus, capable of engineering calculations. Several prisoners score higher than average British university students. Thornley writes in her report to the War Office, "These young men were not stupid. They were deliberately miseducated, taught mythology instead of mathematics, propaganda instead of physics. Given actual instruction, they excel. I have taught at Oxford for 15 years, and some of these prisoners are among the brightest students I've ever encountered. What a waste that they were sent to fight rather than to study. What a tragedy that their talents were devoted to destruction rather than creation." Dr. Chen's literature students perform Hamlet in German, a full production, with costumes made from dyed burlap sacks, a stage built from scrap wood, an audience of fellow prisoners and British staff. The boy playing Hamlet delivers the "what a piece of work is a man" speech with tears streaming down his face because the words carry a weight they would not have carried a year ago. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god. The speech is a lament and a hope, an acknowledgement of human capacity for both greatness and horror, and every person in the audience understands they are watching not just a play, but a reckoning. Arthur Morrison's engineering students complete their reconstruction designs. The best plan for a mid-sized city with integrated housing, efficient transportation, sustainable water and power systems is so impressive that Morrison submits it to British reconstruction authorities who use elements of it in actual post-war planning. The students do not learn this until years later, but when they do, they understand that their education in captivity was not merely theoretical, that they were being prepared not for punishment, but for responsibility. January 1946. The coldest winter in decades. Klaus Reinhardt and 300 others board trucks for the journey back to Germany. They carry their certificates, their books, their letters of recommendation, and something less tangible but more significant, a changed understanding of themselves and their nation. As the trucks pass through the camp gates, several prisoners look back at Camp 174, at the barracks where they studied, the library where they read, the football pitch where they played, the classrooms where their certainties were dismantled and rebuilt into something more complex and honest. Colonel Vickers stands at the gate, saluting as each truck passes. He does not know if his experiment worked, if these boys will truly help rebuild Germany as democrats rather than authoritarians, if education can overcome the damage of years of indoctrination. But he has done what he set out to do, treated them not as enemies to be punished, but as human beings capable of change, as minds capable of learning if given the opportunity, as young men who deserved a second chance they did not earn but might yet justify. The trucks roll through England one final time, and the prisoners really see, what they missed on the journey in. They notice the orderliness of British society, the resilience of people who endured 6 years of war without collapsing into barbarism, the quiet dignity of a nation that won without becoming monstrous. One prisoner, watching a British family walk to church, remarks to his companion, "They did not become like us to defeat us." The observation contains an entire education, that strength does not require cruelty, that victory does not require vengeance, that a nation can fight for its survival without abandoning its principles. At Dover, waiting for the ship to Cuxhaven, Klaus Reinhardt sees the white cliffs Churchill spoke about, the symbol of Britain's resistance, the boundary Hitler never crossed. He thinks about the propaganda films he watched as a Hitler youth, the promises that Britain would fall in weeks, the assurances that the Aryan race would sweep away the decadent Anglo-Saxons. He laughs at the memory, not bitterly, but with the amazement of someone who realizes he believed something preposterous and only now recognizes how preposterous it was. A British soldier, hearing the laugh, asks, "What's funny?" Klaus replies in careful English, "I am thinking how much I did not know." The soldier nods. "Well, you know more now, don't you?" Klaus considers this. "Yes," he says finally, "I know I do not know everything. That is the beginning of knowledge, I think." The ship crosses the channel in heavy weather, arriving at Cuxhaven on January 15, 1946. The returning prisoners disembark into a Germany they barely recognize, cities reduced to skeletal ruins, populations scavenging for food and fuel, occupation authorities struggling to maintain order amid chaos and starvation. The prisoners scatter to their hometowns, Hamburg, Berlin, Munich, Dresden, Stuttgart, carrying their British-issued books and credentials, walking through landscapes of rubble toward uncertain futures. Most will rebuild. Klaus Reinhardt returns to Stuttgart, finds his mother alive, his father dead, his sister married to a returning Wehrmacht soldier who lost his left arm in Russia. Klaus enrolls in the Technical University when it reopens in 1947, studies civil engineering, graduates in 1951, and spends the next 4 decades designing bridges, water treatment facilities, public housing, infrastructure for the Federal Republic of Germany. He never speaks publicly about his time as a prisoner in England, but he keeps his camp library books on a shelf in his office, and when students ask about them, he says only, "I learned to build in a place where I expected to be broken." Others follow similar paths. The mathematics student from Hamburg becomes a professor, teaching calculus to a new generation of Germans who will never know dictatorship. The Hitler Youth leader who experienced joy-solving differential equations becomes an aerospace engineer, working on civilian aviation projects in the 1960s. The mechanic who questioned why Germany kept fighting opens a repair shop in Munich, becomes known for his honesty and precision, raises 3 children who grow up in a democracy, and cannot imagine living under tyranny. Not all succeed. Some return to find families destroyed, homes gone, futures impossible. Some embrace bitterness, insisting Germany was wronged, that the education they received was brainwashing rather than enlightenment. A few attempt to resurrect Nazi ideology, holding secret meetings, spreading old hatreds, but they are a minority, marginalized and eventually irrelevant as Germany rebuilds under democratic governance and Allied supervision. Camp 174 closes in 1948, its mission complete. The barracks are dismantled, the land returned to farming, the guard towers torn down. But the education continues, rippling forward through generations, a small but significant current in the larger river of German reconstruction and reckoning. Years later, historians will debate whether the British re-education program worked, whether young men indoctrinated in totalitarianism could truly be transformed through classroom instruction and humane treatment. The answer, as always, is complicated. Some men changed completely, others partially, a few not at all. But the attempt mattered. The effort to treat enemies as human beings capable of learning rather than as irredeemable monsters mattered, and the Germans who did change, who learned mathematics and literature and history and engineering in British POW camps, carried that knowledge into the Federal Republic, into its schools and universities and industries, into the slow, difficult, imperfect work of building a democracy from the ruins of dictatorship. In 1973, a British television documentary interviews several former Camp 174 prisoners, now middle-aged men with careers and families. One of them, a retired engineer whose name is not Klaus Reinhardt but whose story is similar, speaks directly to the camera. "When I arrived in England, I expected punishment. I deserved punishment, I do not deny that. But they gave us education instead. They gave us books instead of beatings, mathematics instead of humiliation, Shakespeare instead of starvation. And I understand now what they were doing. They were showing us what we had fought against, what our regime had tried to destroy. Freedom does not merely mean doing as you wish. It means thinking as you wish, learning without censorship, growing beyond the beliefs you were taught as a child. I came to England as a soldier of the Reich. I left as a student of humanity. That is the difference. And that difference rebuilt Germany." The documentary ends with footage of the former Camp 174 site, now rolling farmland with no trace of barracks or wire. But the education endures, written into the lives of men who learned, late and painfully, that strength is not measured in conquests, but in the courage to admit error and the willingness to change. They arrived as prisoners expecting punishment. They left as students who had learned the most important lesson, that the war they fought was wrong not because they lost, but because it was unjust from the beginning, and that rebuilding required not forgetting that truth, but carrying it forward, a burden and a guide, into the uncertain work of building a better nation from the rubble of an evil one.